Hello and welcome back to Last Week in Rugby League, your run through of the last 7 days of Rugby League around the world, brought to you by the team here at CKM Red Rugby League with myself, Matthew Wright, and my beautiful assistant, Luke Jobson, your Australian in America, a very, very strange place.
Yeah. Let's take it easy. Let's not start the beauty talk just yet, Matty. But no, it's good to be back. Another ripper week in rugby league. The NRL season just 2 weeks away now. Yeah, players of Supercoach starting to furiously figure out who's going to be in their teams, and then obviously the Super League is starting to run amok. So plenty to talk about. So we might as well get cracking with the knacking and go straight into it.
Yeah, so we'll make a start straight through into Thursday then, and the big piece of news coming straight out of the Rabbitohs, and that is that the succession plan for Wayne Bennett eventually departing the club has been set in place and set in motion, and that is that Jason Demetriou, his current assistant coach, will be taking over the reins from 2022. Bennett will then step down from the club at the end of the 2021 season.
No one who has followed the rugby league for any period of time in the last 10 years has to be surprised about this. Jason Demetriou has been Bennett's long-time assistant, was at the Broncos. I can't quite remember if he was at St George as well. But when Bennett went to the South Sydney Rabbitohs, Demetriou followed him straight there. It was a matter of when, not if, and now that there's a date, I think it gives a lot of hope to Souths fans. The team is already very good. They have a very strong roster. They've got a very set halves pairing, some good outside backs. They've got young talent coming through, and now that they've got that vision, I guess now 2-year vision of that succession plan, Souths they've got a lot to look forward to here.
Yeah, and Demetriou's been around rugby league for a long time, a former player, but you've got to now start to wonder, is this Wayne Bennett officially stepping away from rugby league? He's no longer the England coach, with Sean Wayne taking over that role, the former Wigan head coach, then went to Union and is now back in league as England's head coach. But, you got to think, is this Wayne stepping away, or has he got something in the pipeline?
It's time, I think, for Bennett to give the reins up. He's done that with England. I think this is his extended farewell tour. Come 2021, he'll be gone as coach. He may hang around in an advisory role, perhaps. He might go back to Red Hill, to Brisbane, and do the same there. But I think this is very much the start of his farewell tour. And come 2021, it may be just a fade into the background, but this is Bennett saying, all right, the time's come, I need to step away.
Through into Friday, and Super League was back, but more importantly, there was a big piece of expansion news coming out, hitting mainstream media very, very quickly and then taking off, and that is that, according to Morley, the RFL have notified English League One sides that Ottawa has been given the green light to enter into 2021. This means that the Canadian franchise, run by former owner of the Toronto Wolfpack, Eric Perez, will then be straight into League One and fighting for their spot in there, with what Perez has already said will be a largely in-part Canadian side featuring Canadian homegrown players.
That's good. It's really good news for expansion sides. Obviously, Toronto, we'll get to them and their struggles in the Super League, but they've been a fantastic for the game of rugby league in North America. It's brought eyes to the product. Ottawa, it's only 4 hours away from Toronto, for those that don't know. So, if they can get themselves a 16, 17, 18,000 seat stadium there in Canada for a pre-season friendly, there's some big time moves that could be made north of the American border. But great news for them. Obviously, New York is still trying, and we can run over that in a couple of minutes. And Matty, obviously, our boys, Red Star Belgrade, we've announced that in due time, we're not quite sure when, but in due time, we'll be applying for League One as well. So this is really, really good news just for the game of rugby league as a whole.
Yeah, and I think it probably patches some of that rift as well. You can start to see some of the Canadian fans getting a little bit frustrated with the Wolfpack, just due to the fact that there isn't really a Canadian presence in the team at the minute, and they really wanted to see that. I mean, it's something that they've had the opportunity to do for a few years now, but have not decided to do so. Instead, fans have took it upon themselves to start forming teams, like you see the North Haldimand Wolfpack. They've started to come about in the Toronto provinces, as well as a few other teams, and then you're starting to see the Ontario League coming through as well, and obviously then you've got the Canada Ravens, the women's team. So there is progress being made, and I think that Ottawa coming in will only really drive that and build on it.
Yeah, most definitely. If Canada, it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be really interesting come this next World Cup qualifying period, which, depending on how things go, I might still be around here in the States for. Canada could be a cheeky force. They're not. I don't think they're going to be up to par with that of the Hawks or the Reggae Warriors, but they have themselves, if they can build up over these next 4 years, they have themselves just a little bit of a chance to potentially cause an upset.
Absolutely. So then moving on to Friday night Super League, 3 games to bring you there. Starting off at Castleford, they beat Wakefield 35-15 in their game. A close first half, but then Castleford really running away with it after Wakefield getting hampered by a few injuries there. A little bit more on that later. Hull KR versus Huddersfield. Huddersfield going top of Super League after a 22-4 win. Their halves pairing of Caesar and Gaskell really clicking, really causing problems now in Super League. If they can keep this form and build on this momentum, they're going to be really, really dangerous. And then finally, Warrington 32, Toronto 22. A real helter-skelter game, a lot closer than people thought it was going to be. A couple of really strange moments in there. The first being this try in which Warrington completely forgot to put a dummy half in, and then the ball ending up in the arms of Andy Ackers, probably the easiest try that he'll ever score. And then followed up by this moment of absolute madness when Gareth Widdop scored his first Super League try. Tom Lynham passing the ball in Warrington and Widdop collecting it in Liverpool. The ball deemed backwards out the hands though, so all good. Widdop registers his first Super League try.
The description of that last try, Gareth Widdop's first, is pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate, but again for Warrington, it's a big time win for them. It keeps them kind of towards that top half of the table, with the ladder up as it is right now. You've got Castleford up the top with 5 games. Huddersfield, 2 games in hand, 6 points. Warrington, with that win and the points differential, it keeps them in 6th place. You can only harp on so much about Toronto and their struggles. I think they're very slowly starting to find a groove in Super League, but it's, as you mentioned earlier, Matty, the issues that they've had with fans being fed up, and we mentioned it last week, a couple of issues behind the scenes that have seen some key backroom players walk away. It's a tough time to be a Wolfpack fan, but in saying that, you have to think they haven't played a single game in Canada yet. And once they start bringing those games back over, I think you'll really start to see the Wolfpack grow into the Super League season.
Yeah, so I mean, it's only going to be a matter of time before they do register that first win. But the gap in the table is going to open up on them real quick if they don't get that win. But they've obviously not had an easy few games. They've got the Rhinos coming up as well. They've just faced Warrington. They've got St Helens this weekend. it's going to be tough for them. But that first win will come, and when it does, they'll have to use that as a platform to really kickstart their season from there. Into Saturday, and it was an action-packed day from the word go. Starting off in the Southern Hemisphere, you had culture meeting rugby league and sport combining with history to make this beautiful symphony that nobody can argue with. Was an incredible spectacle for all involved. The Indigenous taking on the Maori New Zealand All Stars, a fantastic game. Of course, Quaden Bayles leading the team out to start with, the 9-year-old bullying victim, and then followed up by the traditional war dances. Really captured the interest. Can only be a good thing for the sport to really celebrate and embrace that culture. The Indigenous, unfortunately, on the losing end this time around. Brandon Smith, the craftsman of their downfall in the end. The Melbourne number 9 coming through with 2 late tries to really nail the casket closed in that game.
Yeah, Brandon Smith, 175 metres, 5 tackle breaks, 4 line breaks and 2 tries. Handy stats for arguably the backup hooker for the Storm, but he's also, he played lock. He played in the 13 at the back end of last season and had some really good games there. 30-16, a solid turnout up on the Gold Coast there. A cracking game. A couple of interesting things I think to take out of it is the captain's call. Wasn't used until the 65th minute. Adam Blair, I guess the history maker, if you want to put it in that way, to use it unsuccessfully. And a good game. It was just a really good game. It was really fun to watch. A fantastic performance by both sides. Two concerns I think that come out of it in terms of the injury front. Brandon Smith out 4 to 6 weeks with a facial fracture that doesn't require surgery, so that's very lucky for both the Storm and Smith. And then Chris Smith, injured off the field, had to be helped off. I haven't seen whether he's gone for the year, but it's from what I've pulled up, it helps if I can say the word right, a suspected knee injury. So hopefully, if he is out, it's only a couple of weeks and not one of those ACL injuries that have seemed to be popping up all over the world of rugby league.
Yeah, and they weren't the only stars in the wars. Wade Graham, of course, picking up a knock as well. He's going to be doubtful for round 1, as is St George's prop Josh Kerr. He picked up a bad knock as well. More details on that to come in later weeks when the full extent of the damage is confirmed, but hopefully nothing serious for either of those two. The men weren't the only Indigenous and Maori teams in action. Later on, the women took the stage and they used it to its full potential to really broadcast a fantastic game. The Indigenous women coming out with the win, 10 points to 4. Nakia Davis-Welsh with the deciding try 47 minutes into the game, as the Indigenous women took out a historic win in that one. So again, great game all round. Really good to see the women's game taking off and getting that platform too.
Yeah, I think it's about time that the women's sides were starting to get that high profile platform, and it's really good to see these teams really starting to come out, and these players, and these aren't players that are just pulled out of nowhere as well. You've got some insane, some really good female players here in these teams. You got Tungai, Talisha Harden, Kiana Takarangi, obviously sister of Parramatta player Brad, Corbin McGregor, Crystal Rota. Those are 4 or 5 names right there that are immediate players for Australia. Nakia Davis Welsh, as you mentioned, Maddie, a Queensland representative. These are players that represent Australia, that represent New Zealand, and represent them very well. So the fact that they're getting on this stage and able to represent their heritage is really fantastic and a big step forward for the game.
Yep. So back into the Northern Hemisphere, and we're back in Super League, and Great Britain assistant coach Ian Watson managed to channel his inner Jeff Tuvey as he went after an investigation and an explanation from head of referees Steve Ganson after he claimed that Salford were robbed against the Rhinos. The Rhinos taking out a 22-8 win in that one, but Watson claiming that poor decisions, bad judgment and just overall neglectful refereeing were what put Salford out of that game. Unfortunately for Watson, though, the roles were reversed as the RFL turned around and said, actually, we want to ask you some questions now because you shouldn't be coming out in a press conference and coming straight after us, straight after a game.
Yeah, well, did he pull out the infamous "there's got to be an investigation"? It's just... you could say he's doing a Jeff Tuvey, you could say he's doing a Ricky Stewart, you could pull really any of those two out and kind of just reference that. But, it's unfortunate. Leeds ending up with the win in the end. A hard-fought win. In terms of Salford, they just got to kind of push on to next week, drop this game behind them. And as for Watson, one would think that he's going to be a little lighter in the pocket by this time next week.
Sticking with Super League teams, and St Helens were in action in the World Club Challenge, taking on NRL premiers, the Sydney Roosters, and this game delivered everything it promised. The two best sides in both hemispheres going head-to-head in an absolute war, and it delivered on every single front. In the end, the decisive blow for the Roosters, coming from Luke Carey after he got on the end of a Takiaho break. Really fantastic game, 20-12 in the end. St Helens running it close, sticking with the Roosters as well as they could do, as well as any team can do, really. They've got an incredible roster. It was a fantastic game from a neutral point of view.
No, the Saints gave them a big run for their money there, but the Sydney Roosters able to get up 20-12. A big time performance from the Roosters, who are down a couple of outside backs. They had Angus Crichton playing in the centres, which isn't something you generally think will happen. But yeah, the two props scoring for St Helens. They have some guys with NRL experience. You've got some stars as well with Tommy Mackinson and Johnny Lomax. But the Roosters just too strong, and now St Helens can kind of push forward with their season, while the Roosters will, after a quick trip to Barcelona, skirt their way back to Australia and get ready for the opener in a couple of weeks.
And our final talking point from Saturday was an international friendly between our good friends at Peru and Brazil Rugby League. Brazil coming up with the win in that one, 30 points to 14. Unfortunately, though, in a statement released on Facebook after the game from one of the heads of the Latin Heat, one of the godfathers of South American Rugby League, Robert Bergin, he announced that, unfortunately, a few jerseys were stolen after the game, and that it somewhat marred the event. So if you would like to help out Brazil Rugby League at all, head over to their Facebook page or head over to Latin Heat, drop them a message and see what you can do, because they are going to need some new kits sorting out. And as a developing nation, it's always a challenge. But let's not focus too much on the unfortunate events of that game.
Yeah, look, that's again, I mentioned last week, just being a nice person. That's a dick move to a team and a country that has made some huge steps, not only in men's but women's rugby league as well. It's been, but getting back to the game, a big time game. It was a big test for Peru, obviously coming up against a more developed nation in the world of rugby league. But knowing Jamie Perez, he won't be too worried about the result of that game. They performed really well. Our guys over there with Peru, he's starting to get cracking over in Peru with a domestic competition and sorting that stuff out. So I'm not saying that they're going to be the next Jamaica, but from hearing his vision back when I was back in Australia in the middle of last year, and hearing what he's kind of envisioning for Peru Rugby League, these guys, maybe not 2025, but 2029. Don't be surprised if we see them there.
More bad news rolling over into Sunday though, and that is that one of everybody's rugby league favourites, he certainly captured the hearts and the imaginations of many fans after his heartbreaking appeal for a new club after being released by Parramatta, is that Cameron King's season is over before it started, suffering another ACL injury. Really bad news for him. He just started to pick up his NRL career again after taking a huge gamble, moving to the UK, trying his arm with Featherstone. He attracted a little bit of Super League interest as well, but ultimately his goal was to go back down under. He got his move, but has unfortunately in those trial games pulled up with an ACL. So thoughts for Cameron at this very difficult time.
I'm not going to say he's one of Parramatta's best, but he was a legend, a cult figure at Parramatta. A lot of fans were really unhappy when the Eels decided not to renew and to let him go. Like you said, he took that gamble. He went to Featherstone, played lights out that whole season, was able to get a deal with the Sharks. I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 years, but yeah, really starting to get back into the groove, and then this happens. Hopefully, I'm kind of knocking on wood here, I'm really hoping that he's closer to that 6 month injury timeline before he can get back on the field, because that might give him a shot at coming back towards the back end of finals if the Sharks do decide to bring him back after the injury. But yeah, a legend, a cult figure, a legend in terms of his status, not necessarily his gameplay, but a tough, hard, bustling player on the field, a legend off it. Yeah, hopefully he can get back soon.
Then back into the Northern Hemisphere again with Super League. This time the Wigan Warriors taking on Hull FC. Wigan running out 26-12 winners in that one. A few former NRL stars really trialling their arm in those games. Bevan French bagging a try. Jackson Hastings running the field once more. He's really found his own in Super League, and he's looking to show that last season just wasn't a one-hit wonder for him.
While he was at the Roosters back home in Australia, Hastings, and the Dragons, sorry. He did go to the Dragons for a year or two. Hastings had flashes of brilliance. He is a fantastic player. Some off-field issues kind of got him, I wouldn't say blacklisted from the NRL, but a lot of teams didn't want to touch him. Goes over to England, has a standout year last year. He's opened off this year with another cracking couple of weeks. And look, if he continues the way he's going, with how I think the halves are starting to look in the NRL, I would not be surprised if you had a couple of clubs just sniffing around, if not prior to the June 30 deadline, in the next off-season. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw in about 4 or 5 weeks the Titans, if they're struggling, look to bring Hastings back over on, like a rest of the season contract. Yeah, it's just small. I wouldn't even say smaller teams like that, but we saw with the Raiders last year, they brought in George Williams from the UK. He seems to be settling in pretty well in the trials. Seems to be doing really well with the Raiders. So it's not unheard of. Obviously, Gareth Widdop had a cracking couple of years in the NRL before moving back over to the Super League. So we've seen some UK stars come over and struggle, but the halves and the forwards generally make a pretty good dig of it, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hastings comes back.
Through to Monday, and New Zealand Warriors confirming that Sam Lissoni has been released from his contract. Then the Gold Coast Titans immediately snapping him up, released obviously so that he could join Gold Coast. But what does this now mean for the Warriors pack, especially with the news last week that Bunty Afoa picking up an ACL injury and that he'll miss the majority of this season? Lissoni was expected to step up and take his spot, but it seems like the Warriors had other plans and will probably look at from promoting within now.
So one of the one of the big things I think that comes out of the Lissoni news is that the Warriors are not looking to sign someone from outside. There's been a couple of rumours, but one of them is that they're going to boost the contracts of a couple of their youngsters. And obviously, Lissoni played a lot off the bench but had a big impact last year. With Bunty Afoa going down, Lissoni was thought to just slide straight back into that starting role. But the fact that the Warriors been like, no, you know what, you're all good, go to the Titans, states that they're really confident. And we know from past years the Warriors are fantastic at developing young players. It's now just whether they can keep them.
And then bad news for Wakefield Trinity fans, as they announced that two of their stars will miss large parts of this season. First of all, utility, fullback, halfback, running wherever you want, Ryan Hampshire, gone for 6 weeks after playing for 60 minutes with a broken jaw against Castleford. And then in worse news is that Joe Arundel will miss the entirety of this season after sustaining a very severe ACL injury. Really tough times for Wakefield. They're going to be doing it tough in the backs now for a couple of weeks at least.
Yeah, there's not much else that you can really add on to that. ACL, it's the injury of the season right now in both the northern and southern hemispheres. Hampshire, just give him credit where credit's due. Playing for 60 minutes with your jaw in two, you haven't heard of really something like that since what? Sam Burgess played with a fractured eye socket in the Bunnies grand final win?
Yeah, I mean, rugby league players are made out of very tough, stubborn stuff. And Wakefield will surely be grateful that he did see the rest of the game out, as they don't usually pack any backs on their bench or anybody that can really slot in maybe a second row to centre and a centre to wing, but it's tough right now for them, so have to see how they go over the next few weeks after picking up, a couple of serious injuries to their starting roster. Into Tuesday, only one piece of news of note, and that is that Joe Greenwood, former Gold Coast Titans, former St Helens and former Wigan player now, has joined the Rhinos on an initial 2-month loan. It's thought that the Rhinos will invoke a clause that will see them pick him up full-time if he impresses in that 2 months. A decent signing for the Rhinos, in my opinion. They've needed a little bit of muscle in that forward pack, but Greenwood packs a little bit more agility as well. Good for a few offloads, good at getting around the park. Not a bad signing in my eyes.
Yeah, no, definitely not. It's he was strong in his early career at St Helens. Went to Gold Coast. One of the few English forwards I think that struggled over there. 2 years, 22 games, but has come back to the Super League. Been superb for Wigan, and the Leeds needed. They just needed someone that would not only beef up their second row and their prop kind of ranks, but someone who has a little bit of a step that can break through a line, and Greenwood can do that. So if he can impress over at the Rhinos, then I think he has a really good shot of extending that kind of 2-month stay.
Wednesday and Toronto are back in the news, this time with 2 new players coming to their roster from the Wigan Warriors on loan. Ben Kilner and Jack Wells joining from the Warriors just to ease some of those injury problems at Toronto. John Wilkin putting off knee surgery so that he can stay with the club until they're running a little bit thicker in the forward pack. These two are certainly going to help out with that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really do like about the Super League in comparison to the NRL is that they allow for these loan deals to actually happen. It's fantastic to see 2 youngsters over who they play, Wigan. It's fantastic to see these 2 youngsters at Wigan kind of get themselves over to Toronto, give themselves a little bit more playing time, and obviously, no Darcy Lussick, no James Cunningham, Wilkins struggling for the Wolfpack. So, big time additions, at least for the next 4 weeks, and hopefully these two can make themselves well known with Toronto while they're there.
And in very sad and unfortunate news, it was released on Wednesday that former Hull forward Adam Mayer tragically passed after a long-standing battle with the well-documented motor neurone disease that seems to be gripping rugby league right now. Our thoughts with his family in this difficult time. A true legend of the game, gone too soon at the tender age of 47.
Really well said. Played for Cronulla in 1994. Went to Rockdale in 98, Gateshead in 99, played over 100 games for Hull in the early 2000s. A big time player on the field, and as you mentioned, mate, he thoughts and prayers with his family in a really tough time for them.
And then into Thursday, and it's not very often that you see a player's suspension overturned, but quite rightly so, Josh Reynolds will be the marquee man for that talking point after what can only be described as a hellish 3-month-long affair for Josh Reynolds and the West Tigers in general. Reynolds accused of domestic battery after a video of him was secretly recorded of him reportedly abusing his now ex-girlfriend, who it turns out went by 9 different aliases, faked everything from pregnancy to cancer scares and even her own mother dying. 9 news coming out and exposing her, at which point then all charges were dropped after all the details came out of just what kind of person this woman was. So congratulations, Josh, welcome back to Rugby League. And again, it reinforces the point that we made last week. Until you know the full details, don't start sending people hate. If Josh Reynolds proven to be an innocent man on this occasion, but no doubt has been subject to quite a lot of abuse and harassment in the last few weeks, despite this news coming out now.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm pretty sure that we reported on prior to the rebrand. I'd have to go back. I think it was a month ago or so now. But the only thing I can say here is innocent until proven guilty. Josh Reynolds, obviously, if anything, he's guilty of being on the receiving end of a lot of trauma, not only from this ex, who whatever her name is, but from a lot of backlash from the rugby league community as a whole. Very good to see him cleared. Even better news, I think, that the police are investigating his now ex. That if anything tickles my heart just a little bit, because someone just taking away the rugby league aspect for a bit, an innocent man was traumatized for who knows how long, and she is now on the receiving end of a police investigation for the awful things that she did to not necessarily only Josh, but to other guys as well. So hopefully justice will do its part, but fantastic to see Josh Reynolds cleared and able to get back on the field for the Tigers.
100%. But in less positive news, 2 more pieces of injury news, starting with the Canberra Raiders, and that is that they will be without talismanic forward John Bateman, who lit up the NRL last year with his bullish runs, his fearless style, and just outright just being an absolute pain. Bateman ruled out for a minimum of the first 6 weeks of the NRL season post shoulder surgery. Obviously the damage there has been done and he's now had that fixed, so I hope to see him back on the field sooner rather than later.
Obviously needed to get himself fixed up. A bit curious that he is doing or had his surgery only yesterday as we record this, instead of earlier on in the off season, but it's done. It's not as if the Raiders are struggling for talent. They'll just slide Elliot Whitehead over to the other side. Joseph Tapine, will go into lock instead of coming off the bench as that kind of second rower. And someone, I would have said Hudson Young will go into that second row spot, but he's still out for another 6 or 7 weeks now because of his eye gouging scenario. So probably Gula will swing into that right side, but Bateman, surgery, 6 weeks, big loss, but the Raiders, they've got the depth. They shouldn't have too many issues there.
Yeah, and I think this is actually Bateman's second surgery on that shoulder. I do recall maybe a few months ago seeing a picture of him on Instagram with his arms slightly slinged up in a hospital bed with some bandaging on his shoulder. So I'm wondering if maybe there was complications afterwards, or maybe there was just some more fine tuning that needed doing afterwards. So alternatively, that he's come back, he's tried training too soon, and unfortunately, it's undone all that work on it.
According to NRL.com, as I pulled this up, it's an ongoing issue. Hudson Young is suspended until round 6. So he's still gone, but yeah, I think he might have been right. I think he might have been right that he's had surgery earlier. I don't know if it was early or if it was even last off season that it may have been. So I remember he came in late in the preseason for the Raiders. But glad that he's going to get it fixed. He'll be back out there sooner rather than later, and whoever Canberra's playing that first 6 weeks has probably got a little bit of a sigh of relief on the edges there.
Then, in our final piece of news, the Leeds Rhinos' current captain has been stood down. Stevie Ward picked up a bad head knock in that first round loss against Hull FC, failing his return protocol for the last 3 weeks. Richard Agar holding a press conference saying that it's slightly unnerving to see a player fail 3 consecutive concussion protocols 3 to 4 weeks post the actual head knock itself. He's currently in touch with specialists, getting more scans done to see what could be the cause of that, but the Rhinos have said that they are putting player welfare first and will stand down Stevie Ward indefinitely until an answer is conclusively reached as to why this concussion has failed to pass.
Yep, and this is where rugby league stands out, I think, above any other contact sport in the world at the moment. They saw what happened here in America with the NFL and the issues around that, and the Leeds themselves have stepped up and said, you know what, we're not going to take that risk. We saw, for those who don't keep up in the NFL, Jordan Reed for the Redskins over here picked up concussion in week 3, didn't return, failed every concussion protocol test. So, and that's a 17-week season. So, yeah, I'm glad that the Rhinos have said, you know what, you failed 3 in a row, let's get some more tests, let's see what's going on up there. All the best for Stevie Ward. Hopefully he is able to get back on the field sooner rather than later. But, as you mentioned, Matty, fantastic to see that the Rhinos are putting player welfare first and backing their skipper.
Well, that has been your wrap-up of the last 7 days of Rugby League. Plenty more to look forward to next week, as we'll be covering yet more of this beautiful sport. All that's left to say is thank you for tuning in, thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.